Education, a fundamental of society. The United States prides itself on access to education on many levels.
One would think the world's leading country would have the highest test scores and graduation rates. Well, we don't. According to BBC, we don't even rank in the top 20 in math and science scores.
Why is that? Why aren't we the leading students of the world as we so hope to be? We will take a look at that and more on The World Tonight.
Thank you for joining us. Many educational problems are due to money, or the lack thereof. Let's first take a look at issues on a local level. We are joined by our local correspondent, Afiq Hisham.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to start off by talking about how WSU has recently come under fire for poor budgeting and the athletic department's $13 million deficit in 2015. They, like other universities, have obvious unbalanced spending. When President Kirk Schulz took office, he set to work on managing the budget left over from the previous administration. He reinstituted a formalized budgeting process, which is crazy that we weren't using one before.
How does construction fit into the budget?
Schulz said, quote, "We can no longer build new buildings without a comprehensive funding plan in place, and we cannot rely on university reserves to make up for funds that haven't been clearly identified," end quote. He's talking about the buildings sprouting up all around campus and how we can't afford to pay for them. Two of the colleges within the university are in debt. But no, we need to put sleeping pods in a new lounge building because priorities. The 2015 through 2017 operating budget doesn't even mention funding for extracurricular activities, vital for gaining experience. With some of the colleges headed towards debt, there have been many cuts and changes in order to avoid the red. We don't even have a director for the show anymore. They replaced him with a goat wearing a hat.
I like him way more than our old director, if I'm being honest.
So do I. But look, we love our school and all it provides for us. But there has been a great mismanagement of funds over the years. If we're going to drive to be one of the top 25 public research universities, then there needs to be a change. We need to find the money for things like student media, professor salaries, technology, and much, much more.
Thanks, Afiq. Now let's talk about community college. You may think it's just for your smelly cousin who rides a skateboard everywhere and still thinks The Simpsons are funny, but it is actually a legitimate place to get an education. We are joined by our national correspondents, Jacob Grinneman and Eli Clayton.
Many go to community college to ease into life after graduating high school, or working or supporting a family while studying. Others go for the first 2 years of their higher education. According to the National Association for College Admissions Counseling, over half the students enrolled in community college plan to transfer to earn a higher degree.
Classes at community colleges are often smaller. Students get a more personal education compared to universities that have classes of over 300 people. Half of them are watching dog videos on their laptops while the ancient professor drones on about the mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of the cell, you know.
Then there are vocational schools. They focus on specific, career-oriented programs to be finished in 2 years or less. Some careers include plumbing, vehicle repair, cosmetology, electrical maintenance, and others. Without these workers, all you university students wouldn't have your cars your parents bought you, or your douchey undercuts from people who went to school to learn how to make and fix douchey undercuts.
Just because you're getting a degree in business doesn't mean you're above the person who went to welding school. Both educations and careers are important to their own way.
Now, there are more kinds of schools outside of public schools, aren't there?
Yes, in fact, charter schools are a popular alternative to public high schools.
Some parents in the U.S. are taking another route in their children's educations. 42 states and D.C. have charter schools, which happens to be the number of states most of the school students think there are. They are federally funded, privately run public schools. Kind of like the Avengers, but with less mediocre comebacks and explosions.
The first charter school opened in Minnesota in 1991. Since then, they have grown exponentially. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, there were nearly 6,000 charter schools nationwide in the 2012-2013 school year. Charters have developed a controversial image for their academic underperformance and siphoning of public schools' funding, which begs the question, why are the charters taking funding? Simply put, because the chickens are crossing the road. When a child is taken out of public school and placed into a nearby charter school, the funding that was going to the student at the public school follows the student to the charter. Thus, the public schools, which are often already suffering, lose even more finances.
Now, charters are not all bad. Only a few have been shut down or restaffed for fraud, and only one has gone out of business for also being a nightclub. Truly, only a handful have been shut down in the middle of the school year without warning. It really isn't that bad. In all seriousness, charter schools have been shown to work, in spite of many issues. According to 16 National Alliance for Public Charter Schools studies, 15 of them found charter schools outperform their traditional public school counterparts.
One Stanford University study found charter schools do a better job of teaching low-income students, minority students, and students who are still learning English than traditional schools.
Nevertheless, it's clear that an education system that allows any schmuck to open their own school and pass out knowledge may need some more regulations to be truly successful.
Thanks, Jacob. And when it comes to regulations regarding education, like most things, it's the government doing the enforcing. Whether we like it or not, politicians' choices literally govern our lives. That's not to say it's necessarily a bad thing. Democracy is a key function of many countries around the world.
Still, for better or for worse, the decisions made often have a huge impact on institutions. Those in education are no exception. From curriculum to budget, politicians influence educational facilities. Bills such as the No Child Left Behind Act come to mind. The bill emphasized academic achievement through standardized testing, among other things.
However, politicians can overstep their boundaries, something that was recently apparent in Canada of all places, the hunky-dory land of maple syrup, moose, and hockey. On October 17th, British Columbia's Education Minister, Mike Bernier, fired all 9 democratically elected Vancouver School Board trustees. He fired them for failing to pass a budget last June, just hours before the trustees were expected to pass a balanced budget.
While the Vancouver School Board rejected the budget proposal from the BC government for its negative long-term impact, Bernier wrote it was a, quote, misplaced focus on political tactics. Right. So Bernier accuses the school board of political misconduct, then he uses his political authority to fire the entire board? Makes sense, but hey, that's none of my business.
In their place, the BC Education Ministry appointed one of its own employees, Diane Turner, as an official trustee to replace the board for 1 year. Some of the locals are understandably concerned about the appointment. They argue it gives the ministry more power in shaping local education, potentially allowing them to tailor it to their own agendas. It's like a real-life version of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, with all the education politics but none of the wizarding charm.
All in all, this incident is an example of those placed in positions of authority overruling democracy. This is all the more reason why people in the U.S. must inform themselves of the candidates running in state and federal elections.
Now, over to our Common Core expert, Chris Ryder. Chris?
Thanks, Majestic. The Common Core State Standards Initiative, commonly called Common Core, is an educational initiative that details what K-12 students should know in English language arts, literacy, and math at the end of each grade. The whole point of Common Core is to ensure that students are ready for higher education or the workforce after high school. It was developed by the state education chiefs and governors of 48 states. They released standards for English language arts and math in 2010, and today 42 states and the District of Columbia are members of the Standards Initiative. Minnesota only uses the English language arts standard, and 7 states don't use any Common Core standards at all.
Why haven't some states adopted Common Core if it's so widely accepted?
Well, let's look at the states who haven't adopted it first. Oklahoma, Texas, Virginia, Alaska, Nebraska, Indiana, and South Carolina haven't adopted the initiative on a statewide level. If I had to pick 7 states that don't want to read, and I couldn't include West Virginia, Mississippi, and Arkansas, it would be those exact 7 states. As for West Virginia, Mississippi, and Arkansas, sorry. But getting back to Common Core's potential problems, without delving into the specifics, it's not that hard to see why there are some possible issues. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, there are over 50 million K-12 students in public schools in the U.S., and these 50 million students live in 50 entirely different states with entirely different cultures, workforces, and schools. So why should we be forcing all of our kids into the same educational box? Students are going to have different educational needs regardless of where they live. Trying to force them to jump through the same hoop just doesn't seem right.
Who are some people who oppose Common Core?
Teachers, parents, and students. Many teachers say they were left out of the process entirely and the standards are too heavy-handed. It seems a little ridiculous to be forcing teachers, principals, superintendents, and state boards of education to impose standards that they themselves didn't develop. You never ask them to enforce education standards that a coyote came up with. And another large criticism is its lack of consideration for non-traditional learners, which is a legitimate concern. People learn in different ways. Some people can't understand by reading or hearing things. They have to see things. For instance, someone might hear me talk about how awful Common Core is, but they might not understand it until they actually see how awful it is. Teachers have also said it focuses too much on teaching students how to take a test opposed to actually teaching them applicable things. Your boss at Subway won't care if you remember the Pythagorean theorem or how to properly use an MLA citation, but he will definitely care if you're using dandruff instead of Parmesan on a sandwich.
But Chris, aren't education standards an important thing to have? How else can we measure what students know and should be learning?
Yes, we should have basic standards when it comes to education, but it shouldn't come at the cost of stifling creativity and individual growth. Living in a diverse country with a diverse job market requires diverse students, and even though Common Core is at its core a good thing, its implementation hasn't yielded strong results for American education. Oh, and one last thing, even Donald Trump is against it. Out of all the things he hates, even Common Core made it onto the list. So if there's one thing that Donald Trump should deport, it's Common Core. Rachel, Majestic, back to you.
Thanks, Chris. The rising cost of education has been a serious issue for political candidates and voters for years. College affordability is one of the main planks in the Democratic Party's platforms, and it's one of the young voters' greatest concerns. Tuition, fees, and room and board had more than doubled in the last 30 years.
According to the Institute for College Access and Success, 70% of graduates in 2014 had student loan debt, an average debt of nearly $30,000. While the cost of college and student loan debts have risen at high rates, wages have not. So American students are now paying more money to go to college and coming out with more debt, all while making less money at jobs that require more education.
Quiet on set. Action.
Many politicians, including Senator Bernie Sanders, have pointed to European nations as a model for easing the burden. Countries like Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway offer versions of free college, but they have a different way to achieve free college. These countries have significantly higher income tax rates than the United States.
The United States spends more on elementary and secondary education than any other country in the world. Despite this, the U.S. doesn't have a very high ranking in education. In Pearson's Education's 2014 Global Education Performance Report, the U.S. was ranked 14th. South Korea, ranking first, spends considerably less than the United States.
Finally, we want to end the night tonight looking at one of the many outside factors that impacts education: social status. Students from high-income families have outperformed those from low-income families for years. It's evident the income achievement gap between the rich and the poor exists and has grown.
The American family has changed drastically in the past 4 decades. Children raised in high-income families are increasingly likely to be raised by 2 parents, both with college degrees. On the opposite side of the spectrum, low-income children are more likely than ever to be raised by a single mother with a low level of education. The fundamentals at home play a large role in the income achievement gap.
Today's economy has become increasingly divided into 2 sections: a low-skill, low-wage sector with service jobs and routine production jobs, and a high-skill, high-wage sector with jobs in engineering and financial analysis. Pathways to the middle class for workers with just a high school education are few and far between. As a result, educational success has become increasingly essential to economic success.
In 2020, 2/3 of jobs will require some college background. This is worrisome because far fewer students who grow up in poor households go to college. Students from households that earned less than $35,000 represented just 10% of all the degrees awarded.
It's important to note socioeconomics play a vital role. If we want to address the issues within the American education system, we also need to address all of the other factors that have an impact as well.
This is what education looks like both domestically and abroad, and these are the problems facing education. This is The World Tonight.